All right, so we now have an amazing dialogue set for us with two incredible individuals we're going to be talking with for the next hour. The first is a person who's been taking a systems view of life and addresses all facets of complex systems in order to solve human suffering on our global ground challenges. He's a partner with the Aloha's Regenerative Foundation, and he has been involved with climate environmentalism for a very long time. Someone I've known in circles really, truly professionally for probably about almost 25 years. He was one of the first to be trained by Al Gore as a climate speaker, and he's truly on a mission to, as he says, to empower billions of global citizens to live an adaptive lifestyle of health and sustainability within the safe operating spaces of our planetary boundaries. A big fan of Buckminster Fuller, something we both share, and has been active for over 2 decades. I like this, preparing us all for the future of work and living to move us out of the Anthropocene into the Symbiocene. So please welcome up to the stage Marc Buckley. Thank you. Welcome. And joining him is a colleague. We've seen quite a bit of each other up on the hill over in Zurich, environmental scientist and sustainability expert with a strong passion for promoting circular economy and future-proof practices. She's currently part of the research team at the Institute of Management, School of Business at the University of Applied Sciences of Northwest Switzerland. She enables sustainability and circular economy initiatives for SMEs, especially focused on SMEs, through innovative approaches and collaborative solutions. And I really appreciate this focus on the SMEs, because in Switzerland, the SMEs are the absolute backbone of the society. And so many other countries, unfortunately, the SMEs have been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. So this is a wonderful, when we talk about this. So I'd like to welcome up Pavlina Pavlova. Come up to the stage, please. So welcome.
Thank you.
Both of you. Great to have you here. Seriously. So Marc, I want to ask you, I'm going to start with you. And you've been in the game for a while, like the aim being trying to make change happen. So in your professional practice, as you've been observing, what are some of the biggest changes in sustainability, resilience, regeneration that you have observed in these 20, 25 years? From a mindset standpoint, from an action standpoint, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen?
Sadly, not very many. We're repeating a lot of the things over and over again. We're not learning because it's become more of a political or bureaucratic system that's held by people in a space that only have short terms of office. And once their term's over, that message isn't carried over to the next bearers of the torch. As far as international organizations go. But what I have seen that is pretty positive is, for example, I wrote the Sustainable Development Goal Manifesto for the United Nations. A lot of people feel that process was hijacked, or that it was New World Order from Klaus Schwab, or there's some kind of a conspiracy theory around that. But it's actually a pretty old process that started 51 plus years ago at the Stockholm Plus 50, which is now 51 years ago, that initial process. And then it was negotiated and kind of discussed after it was ratified at Rio Plus 20, but it all occurred, the development through that occurred at a side meeting in Bogota, Colombia, well over 28 years ago, if not even more. Which is interesting because most people thought that a couple months before the goals came out that they just all of a sudden magically appeared, and now that they're a big conspiracy theory. So that moment was one of the most magical moments in human history. If you think about it, where 197 countries came together for the first time ever and agreed upon targets, indicators, and goals to keep us at 1.5 degrees of warming, when initially it was supposed to be 2 degrees of warming. And it was that at September 24th when they were launched before the Paris Agreement. And then at the Paris Agreement, we made that bold ambition to go 1.5 degrees. And then we also had the data to make that quick adjustment to put it to 1.5, because what most people don't understand is that there's monies, there's backcasting, there's targets, there's indicators, and there's hundreds of thousands of dynamic scenarios, systems dynamic modeling scenarios that we did from 0.4 degrees of warming clear up to 5 degrees of warming to see what are the levers and scenarios that would come out if we work from December 2030 to basically December 2015. And so we already had those targets and numbers. And so it was not only the world's first global moonshot, but it was the first moment in human history where so many countries have agreed upon anything. Mm-hmm. If you know anything about politicians, delegates, and in countries, it's hard enough for them to decide where to go to lunch, let alone something that's going to keep us at 1.5 degrees of warming. And then we saw how after that agreement was reached, that process was derailed several times because of Trump's election or Brexit or the pandemic or whatever else came down the line that tries to get our eye off the target and make it into something that it's not. So it's kind of a love-hate relationship. I've seen many wonderful things happen, but I've also seen us still trying to figure out how the process works and where we're going. But it's been a gradual evolution towards what we're here for now is regeneration.
Yeah, and so what is regeneration for you? Is right before I go to Pavlina, what's regeneration for you, and why is that now such an important point?
For me, regeneration has only been on the radar for me personally, the shift that I made for about 16 years. Before that, I was in this modus of adaptation and mitigation. So I was more reactionary to the world, where I didn't realize that if I kind of felt like a symbiotic part of the world, that I could actually regenerate myself and have a true life of abundance. And for me, regeneration is really that. It's not reductionism, it's not recycling, it's not repurposing. It is truly regenerative abundance. And I want to just maybe define that for me, but tell you how I came about that. In all living systems, 1 + 1 never, ever, ever equals 2. In biology, ecology, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. It's not even an exponential. It's what we call a super exponential. It's 100x, it's 200x, it's 3000x. And regeneration, we're talking about living systems. And so if we apply that into our lives and into the way we work in our organizations, into our farming, if we're talking about food or ag or gardening, it's really an abundant system that gives us back way more than we need. And it's not about reductionism, but it's really about, for me, also finding that place, not only inner, but place in the world where we can show up and have that. So that's what the definition is for me.
I like that, the super exponential. We are a super exponential group. And so we're in 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. I'm kind of scared to think how many we are, and when we think about that. So Pavlina, what is regeneration for you, and how did you get to this point?
So regeneration for me is to give or make better. And this has a very technical term. It's actually when we talk about environmental systems, where I come from, it means to clean the environmental systems and make them polluted environmental system and make them clean. But it's also on a personal level, generation, next generation, our kids. This is what we talked with Joya 2 days ago. Regeneration, making our kids better than we are and doing what we are doing here because of them.
And so you're working with SMEs, and so what are some of the factors you're seeing for success? And tell us a little bit about more with that,
Factors of success. So SMEs, they're, as you say, very important. And it's actually quite a big group in Switzerland, very important economical driver. And working with those people, they're actually people, because several times we had the discussions here about the dark and the light and the bad and the good. But behind those businesses are actually humans. And as we spoke about regeneration on a human level, they want to drive their businesses into the good. They're just a bit confused because of too many frameworks, because of too many regulations. So the good, the way they are going, they also have families. They also want to have planet. They also want to have clear air. And the way they're heading is on the good side. What they need in the moment is really support, enabling knowledge and understanding that it's not going to happen in 1-2 days. It takes time.
So, and like when you say they need support, what do you mean? Can you give like a more specific ideas of what that might look like?
Sure. So, of course, I work in academia at the moment. We try to support them with the knowledge, with the tools, with the, they need very practical, also empowerment to start. Like we do an assessment and we tell them, well, actually, you do a lot in, let's say, social. A small family-owned company, they don't need to be taught about treating their employments well. There is quite often you see there a very familiar atmosphere. The CEO knows everybody by name. A screw is falling on the floor. He bends, gives back the screw to his mechanics. So they need support, maybe more on the environmental side. And of course, on one hand is the knowledge. But in the next years, I hope now that as we voted for climate innovations, they would also have the frameworks and also the financial means to start doing those transformations, because it's not so easy.
Mm-hmm. Marc, what about you? So, thank you. And so, what about you, Marc? So you also work with companies and have been, what would you say, because I'm interested in trying to amplify the positive, because we know a lot of the negative things. So how are some of the success factors, right? Just to say, I'm very interested you're trying to pull out some of the I call it magic dust that one needs in order to create this situation, the context for success to blossom or bloom. So what would you say are some of those success factors that we can be trying to, the fertilization, if you will, the loam in the soil?
It's really that it's just a better model. So whether we're talking sustainability, whether we're talking about regeneration, whether we're talking about environmental social governance, ESG, all of them have proven hands down not only to be a better life model, but to be a better organizational model. If you could put up any organization's capitalistic, extractive type of a model head-to-head with a real sustainable business model, one that's regenerative or follows or has applied the ESGs, we're seeing not only numerous case studies, but just prime examples that those organizations weather the storms of life a lot better than those who are on this capitalistic or extractive, relying on outsourcing or not the best practices to work with other partners in order to produce their products. They don't have, in times of pandemic need or that, they don't have the resilience. They don't have the ability to keep their doors open. They need funding and support and bailouts. But if you've changed that model, not only do they outperform conventional counterparts, And what we saw is the biggest proof is the beginning of the pandemic. We had an economic downturn. We had huge economic problems and the pandemic, and people were having to close their doors and all sorts of things. But we saw those organizations that had already applied ESG, sustainability, or the goals into their model, into their organizational core model, on the Nikkei, New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, S&P 500, S&P Global, the Morningstar Review. In the beginning of the pandemic and that economic downturn, 25 out of 28 sustainable index funds outperformed their conventional counterparts. Now, I'm not saying that we should turn sustainability into investment, because I'm not, but the cores of some of those models just outperform bad business. They have more resilience and sustainability. Now, not only does the book from Jeffrey West Scale talk about this, but if you've ever heard of Nicholas Stern and the Stern Review or the Stern Report, literally thousands of organizations who have applied those new models into their organization have seen tremendous results, not only for people, planet, and their bottom line. One last thing I have to say to that, and it's really interesting. Just last week, I was at another event, and one of the organizations at that event had came out with an annual report. And in their annual report, right on the beginning page, they talked about the triple bottom line. Does anybody here heard about the triple bottom line? People, planet, and profit? I'm glad you have. Did you also know that in 2018, John Elkington recalled the triple bottom line? It was another moment in history, the first time ever a sustainability concept has been recalled. Do you know why the backstory of that is? And I think Daniel probably knows the backstory, but he was at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development with Unilever, and I don't want to name all the organizations there. And he said, you guys are they were working on a project, We Mean Business Coalition and many other projects. And he says, you guys are, and he didn't put, this wasn't exactly his words, basically bastardizing the triple bottom line. He says, you are using it as a single accounting line principle, only worrying about the profit and forgetting about planet and people. And the very next day, he published, I think it was Forbes or the Harvard Review, that he was recalling it. And then in Green Swans, and much later after his Green Swans book, he came out and he said, when you recall something, you usually replace it with an improved or a fix, right? The replacement was responsibility, resilience, and regeneration. And Green Swan's subtitle was Regenerative Capitalism, which I kind of had to tease him. I don't know how Daniel felt about it. I had to tease John. Isn't that an oxymoron? Regenerative capitalism. But I mean, he has a nice way to put it. But it's just a better model. And so I want to make sure that people understand, we think we have this model and we understand it, but we don't always understand the full things behind it. But it is a better model.
So responsibility, resilience, and regeneration, the 3 R's instead of the triple bottom line. So thank you for that, Mark. Pavlina, I'm actually kind of curious about this, responsibility, resilience, regeneration. When we think about the circular economy and a lot of the things you've been working on, that fits pretty well when you say. So tell us a little bit more about how you're looking at using perhaps these 3 R's in some of the work that you're doing.
So it's interesting because the R's in circular economy are usually understood in a different way. So it's all the activities one can do around the basically products. But I like the concept we speak. So the broader understanding for the circular economy, regeneration is a very strong concept, which is not very well understood also from the practitioners. And as I already mentioned, it's a very technical understanding of it. It's taking areas, ecosystems that are polluted and cleaning them up and bringing them back to even better where they were. And actually there are concepts, and there is even kind of a environmental impact accounting. And there are companies and groups which actually try to monetize this. And so a company can basically invest in regenerating the polluted ecosystems that they're causing. It's a debatable concept, I understand, but it's a way one can go with it. And then I think circular economy is a lot about resilience, and in particular resilience of the local economy. Through circular economy, local services, local employment gets much stronger, and therefore also contributes to resilience. So I can very much relate to what Marc said.
Well, that's really great. Okay, so we're going to take a pause right here, and I'm going to ask you in the audience to talk to your neighbor. Talk to your neighbor. You can pick which way you go. And I want you to come up between the two of you, at least one amazing question that is going to stump these two experts up here, these by two guests here. So you've got about 3, 4, 5 minutes max to come up with two amazing, or maybe one amazing question, all right? Go.
Okay. I have this program for SMEs. I can notice that too.
So we talked about ecological economics. So I mean, I love that she brought up circular economy, but I see that that's the biggest download that's going on all over the world. So we have the EU Beyond Growth event, which was actually amazing, and then just a week later we had Change Now in Paris, so another amazing event. And then we're having events like this, but there's these downloads going on all over the world where people are really saying these economic models, these systems that we've instilled for ourselves, they're just not working for us anymore. What's the change? And because they're not seeing the change fast enough, they're actually bringing in that input.
To wrap up, have some questions, please? Okay, I want to what's the work at inspiring you? That would be good. What you're talking about here, what I'll be through your at a systemic level, the structures of systems. For you,
It's very concrete, yeah.
you're at the very little tiny family business with 3 people. Right? And they have to get it too. And using the structure that you're working on, they need to get it too.
And actually, the bottom up is more powerful than the top down. So the SMEs, smallholder farmers, the small businesses, they have much more power than the big ones, but they're not in that paradigm, and they also are not into that collaborative mode like they should be. If they collaborated more, even exchanged ideas instead of felt like they were competing for monies one against each other, it's a much stronger, more powerful force.
Okay, I like that you mentioned this because that's what we do. We also build up a community because we incubate them. You inspire from startup incubators. We incubate them and they create a little community between themselves and cross-pollinate, also inspire each other.
On the solstice day was World Localization Day, and that's about local futures, or what we call local economies. And those small La Punta economies, they're actually the strongest. Not only do they bring in that core fabric that's needed to hold the community together, but also stimulate and keep it vital. And then those can then go global. They can go global, but first you need that local economy. When I first got into economics, it was the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. Under Alan Greenspan.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's come on back. I can tell by the energy in the room, all of a sudden we had a little bit of fun there, right? All right. So we have time for questions now. So who has come up with the absolute killer question? That killer question. Okay, up here, front left, and then we'll go to Brian, and then front back, and then front right. So Kenny's going to take one here. Okay.
All right, so we want to know from both of you. So Marc, who has rather the global systemic perspective, and Pavlina, the rather hands-on local. Which suggestion would you give to Pavlina and Pavlina to Marc in terms of this regeneration that we need?
Wait, repeat the question again? Sorry, I didn't quite get it.
You are very proud of this question. Go on. Now we notice that you have somehow two different perspectives. Marc, a more global and big systemic ones, and Pavlina, you work also hands-on. Mm-hmm. And so we would like to hear one key suggestion to each other. Pavlina, from your perspective to the global one, a global one to the local one.
Cool one. Should I start?
Sure.
Yes.
She look at that grin on her face. She's like, yeah, I want this one.
You might want to answer the same, so that's why I want to shoot it first. So yeah, from the local, I think a personal attitude, hand-holding, is very important in all those processes. So I would recommend, if you have the chance in these big political, macroeconomical meetings, try to find the person sitting on the other side of the table. Try to get to their mindset and try to hold their hand. Maybe makes it easier to do the tendering.
Thank you, Pavlina. Marc?
I'm actually
just advice for Pavlina.
I actually love that advice, and I take it on board. My advice back to you is more. I believe that from bottom up and the SMEs and the smaller organizations, that they're actually the majority. They're the powerhouse that can have the most influence over those very few on the top, whether it's an international or global. And so unite those voices, collaborate, come together, because you're a much larger force that we need to have heard at that global stage, because a lot of the time at the global stage we forget that. And so I want to hear that voice, but I also want to see you guys unify instead of having so many separate voices.
Super cool, thanks.
Very good. Good advice. All right, so Brian was right next, then back far left, and up front.
Yeah.
Small, medium enterprises, entrepreneurs, groups, smallholder farmers, individuals.
Great. My question is mostly directed at Mark, but perhaps Pavlina will have something to say on it also. How soon is it going to be until we get generally accepted accounting principles that include and measure the 3 R's?
Ooh.
That's important to guide investors in comparing company performances, because right now you get some companies who are on the best, most sustainable lists, and the same company is on the worst of other sustainable lists. And investors, of course, are totally confused.
This is a great conundrum.
Yeah, so there's a few things coming out. So I don't know if I should say this too loud, but I also sit on the core commission of the EU taxonomy, have since 2018 and will for another 5 years. This year we rolled out CSRD, goes into full effect next year.
What's CSRD?
CSRD is Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and it's all organizations in the European Union. We're in Switzerland, so here's the controversy of the whole thing. Organizations with 250 or more employees are required to do this reporting. But there's this whole flow. So not only SDGs played into the ESG played into corporate social responsibility, but the Human Rights Reporting Due Diligence Directive, or the Corporate Social Reporting Due Diligence Directive as well, all kind of tie together. And so now there's a lot of talk of ESG woke, or it's not real, or it doesn't affect me in the US, or I'm Switzerland, I'm neutral, so it doesn't affect us. But basically, it's really interesting. It was set up and structured in a way that reporting and investing can no longer be outsourced. That you can outsource 100% of that to someone else and say, will you take care of our ESG and our CSRD and our corporate social responsibility and our compliance for us? And then if it gets messed up, then you can blame KPMG, Deloitte, Ernst & Young for their mistakes, which we know how that goes with many other examples just in the past. Matter of fact, Mariana Mazzucato just wrote a great book called The Big Con, talking about accounting firms and how they're playing in wrong areas. So it's really a nudge for everyone to put those core principles in their organization, what I mentioned before. How can we get sustainability, ESG, and then John Elkington's responsibility, resilience, and regeneration into our business models, and that we have ownership of it, but we actually walk the talk. We actually change our organizations. And there's two things to finish answering that question. One, there's this big thing about greenwashing. We've all heard it, right? But there's also a flip side to that. There's fake it till you make it. Most organizations who have faked it till they made it, just said, we're going to totally greenwash this, we're just going to bullshit everybody. After 6 months, 7 months, 12 months, they're like, damn, this is a better system. This actually works. We're just half-hearted bullshitting everybody, and guess what? Our customers are happy, our employees are happy, we're seeing better returns. Maybe there's something to this. Let's look into this a little bit further, right? And then they go all in, and guess what? They see the results, they see the benefits. And that's the true trick. There's always going to be corruption. There's going to always be somebody who's going to find a hack or a trick to get out of it. But why waste your time? When a standard at any level comes out, it's a low bar, because it's already 5 to 7 years outdated, because it's taken the bureaucrats and the politicians that long just to bring it out. So why don't you as an organization, as an individual, set the bar higher so that not only you'll meet that standard, but you'll start to go towards regeneration. You'll start to go to those higher planes of true organizational development. And to answer the reporting question, that's still a big thing, but there are many tools out there that can help with that. As far as the 3 Rs, those aren't falling under the European Union. They fall under John Elkington, and it's up to us to adopt them, and they're not really an official thing. So, but the data's out there. There's numerous organizations working on that.
Thank you, Marc. Pavlina, you want to-
Just to add, regarding Switzerland, we are adopting the European regulations, and even if not, Switzerland is a little island in the middle of Europe. We don't have so much resources, so every company operating in Switzerland has European customers and European suppliers. So they will be automatically get into these environmental reporting standards.
The interesting thing about that, and it's kind of, I can answer every question with tons of things, but there's one interesting. I was just at EarthX in Dallas, Texas. It's the U.S.'s biggest environmental event. And there was this big talk about ESG woke going on there, so that it's not real. They're trying to fight it in the courts and things like that. In reality, there is no way the ball's set in motion. It's going to happen regardless. And the only way out of it is a sustainability way. So if you don't want to participate in ESG and in the taxonomy, even if you're not in the European Union, then the next logical thing is don't do any business with anyone outside of your organization, which is pretty hard unless you bring back to local economies, to local, regional, and place and say, we're a complete system taking care of everything in and of ourselves. And then those organizations will be sustainable. That's the goal that we would like. But if not, if they do business with anybody else, then they've automatically got to deal with scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions, upstream and downstream, because that can no longer be pushed off on anywhere else. So it's a very kind of complicated process, but it makes sense on the way we're going. And
Okay.
can I say just one last thing?
Last breath there. Last breath.
What happened during the pandemic was there's this crazy thing that happened. I don't know if you heard about. Everybody heard about the supply chain or the logistical problems that we saw going around the world. Guess what happened during that? That's nobody's been talking about. Most organizations that were in bad contracts, especially those in India and Pakistan and Mexico and places around the world where they were in contracts to produce goods for Western world places, they invoked the hand of God clause in those contracts to get out of those contracts because those contracts weren't paying a fair wage. They weren't paying the total environmental cost as percentage of EBITDA. They weren't honoring sustainability, environment, and the people for that fair wage. And they were commoditizing products and things. So they broke those contracts. And now we're seeing this huge emergence around the world for what we called responsible or smart contracts, where the environment, fair trade, fair wage, and people are valued, organizations are valued, are not locked into these horrific environmental disastrophe kind of contracts. And so that's a really unique, cool thing that we're seeing, which is for the small people who are being exploited.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's really cool. Thank you. Thank you for that. There's another question back here. We can't hear, so there you go.
Yes.
Thank you.
My question is related to the developing countries context or poor countries context. So, of course, you're right that at the bottom of the pyramid there is an enormous power. There's a saying in Hindi, I'll try to translate it in English, that to feed a thick cow, 2 huge elephants have to be fed. And that means governments and all the people in between or all the institutions. So my question for you is, the SMEs, we always talk about the SMEs which are successful. There are a lot of studies being published, and same for the SMEs which are failing or failed. But the question is, the SMEs or micro, like really, really small companies which are on the verge of bankruptcy, they are like really, really struggling to survive. So what are your thoughts or maybe concrete plans to support them?
It's very hard to, if I don't know the construct of the support system in India, for example. I know a bit from my home country, Bulgaria. And I think, of course, in general, SMEs are constantly under pressure, right? Resources are very, very limited. That's why it's also important to support them, especially if they're on a journey towards sustainability. But it's often, sustainability is actually also a way to go out of these complicated resource intensive moments, because it's either about optimizing processes or empowering people, giving your employees, actually asking your employees where you can save. So I think having a difficult financial and resource situation for SMEs, actually empowering them in sustainability is maybe to go the way out. In different countries, of course, different frameworks and mechanisms for that.
I think this is a very difficult one to answer, not having the context to respond to. So, yeah. Okay, we have time for two more questions. There's like 5 hands going up. So, Katja over here. Oh, Katrin, you were up next. Do you want Casper? Oh, I love that. Yeah. So, okay, and then Katja and then Daniel. Okay.
Well, we were discussing, we didn't come to a question, and I'm going to try to wing it, fake it till you make it, right? The people, planet, profit is kind of a catchy thing. It was revoked. I don't know the new thing, the 3 R's. I just want. We run a very international business, and when I travel to parts of Asia, for example, I meet young people, and they are very, very, very motivated to get ahead, and for them, getting ahead means growth, means a better standard of living, a bigger TV, a car, a bigger house. And sometimes I feel like we come, it's almost like a reverse colonialism. This is obviously a loaded term, but like we come from, most people in this room have a lot more than we can ever consume or need, me included. So it's very easy to say, I'm going to do less, I'm going to be more local. I took 100 flights a year for 10 years, every year, to build up my company. Right? It's very easy for me to say, well, now I'm going to settle, I have kids, I'm going to only take 3 flights a year, right? Mm-hmm. What do you tell to that South Korean or Chinese or Indian person, that wants to get it? How do you make these models that we talk about attractive to them? And I know you've probably given this a lot of thought.
So I also do a lot with Asia. So there's a sustainable clothing company called EcoAlf and sustainable brands out of Asia as well. And they collect fishing nets in Thailand and in the Philippines and make clothing out of them, tires and things like that. It's a real hard thing, because what we're seeing in some respects, and I would say, is that East Pacific Asia, so Thailand, Philippines, and that we're seeing that they love the Western world concepts like triple bottom line and the buzzwords regeneration and ESG. Really don't know the concepts, but it's like, what's the theme this year? Okay, we jump on that, and then they never get the true understanding or meaning of it. But the principle, and the reason I love the theme of this entire event is, for me, I don't see regeneration in an organizational model or in my life as something of reductionism or mechanization or breaking me down into silos or to parts. I see it as abundance. If I apply it correctly, it's actually a better model than what we're seeing in other organizations, whether it's extractive or capitalism, whatever model it is. And it's a hard discussion, and it's really a discussion that needs to happen on an individual basis. We can't do a shotgun approach and have it fall on everybody, but it's a journey of awakening that everybody has to kind of reconnect with their world around them and how things are working for them. And for years, even as a futurist, we, and I don't know if Chris had the same example or Bobby either, but we always used to talk about the future of work, right? And there was always this humongous conversation about this work-life balance. I just want to tell you now, and sorry if there's any kids in here, work-life balance is bullshit. It doesn't exist. It's never existed. If you're one person at work and another person in your life, you're probably bipolar.
Yeah.
Or let's say you go 2 steps forward in a successful direction at your work and 2 steps forward in a successful direction in your personal life, your marriage or your family life or your church. You're probably staying in the middle. You're stuck, right? You're not going forward. There is only life, and it's all going in one direction. And so instead of jumping on these buzzwords or the new terms or whatever, let's create lifestyles that are all moving in the same direction, that people understand what the model is, how to live it, how to apply it, and that it's actually a more successful model, not just for life, but for your organization if you do it right. Another project I do in Thailand is called the Crab Bank, and it's a fairly new project. Have you ever seen that one or heard of it? They were totally, all the crabs were gone. And it's because when they do crab harvesting, they'd harvest all the ones that had the eggs. And so they just cook them up and that, and so there was no new eggs repopulating everything. So they took these crabs and started putting them in Home Depot or plastic paint buckets until the eggs were ready to be harvested or to be birthed or released, whatever the process is called. And then they take them out to a conservation area. Just in that act, not only did the crabs regenerate, but the tiger sharks came back, the underwater ecosystem came back. There's tons of things that when we talk regeneration, we're talking about life and how do we regenerate. It's not conservation, it's not protection, it's regeneration. How do we put that into a model? And it's a business. The Crab Bank is a business.
I like the crab bank. Not a crabby bank, but a crab bank. We're going to come to that. We have one more question right here, and then we're going to make a little summary, and we're going to go into projects. Gotcha.
We talked a lot about personal resilience, but my question would be, how do you measure resilience, and what are some of the key components that you have identified for something that is very resilient, and how can we sort of like scale resilience from like an individual to like community and city sort of like perspective? And if you can, maybe make one example of something that you have seen that's very resilient.
Pavlina.
Just a spontaneous idea. I actually never had to measure resilience, but what I would do a benchmark, what's now, and then measure the state, whatever parameter it is, over a certain period of time. And I assume a resilient system, either environmental or economical, should maintain the same parameter, whatever parameter you're measuring.
So this isn't a big secret, but everybody knows that before the SDGs was the Millennium Development Goals. So what are the goals after the Sustainable Development Goals?
Regenerative?
No, they're the Resilient Development Goals. And they were already started in a process in 2017, and then they were officially turned over to all interagencies of the United Nations in 2019 in November before COP25. and it's a program called Resilience Frontiers under the UNFCCC, and it will be the Resilient Development Goals. And so specifically that questions is very asked. And honestly, just so that you know, we wanted it to be everybody involved, all the stakeholders, and there's hundreds of stakeholders and member nations, wanted the regenerative development goals or to go in the direction of regeneration. And it was just too horrific or big of an ask for the United Nations to even think that far ahead. If I were to tell you about the Moonshot Workshop and the future workshops we did, iterations with the United Nations Secretariat and the member states to get to this, they were still stuck in the past. It was hard, even though we had great people, to get kind of into the future where we need to go. And it's sad. But right now there's 8 pathways for resilience development goals and resilience frontiers, the resiliency lab that they've worked on. And there are similar measures, dynamic modeling, backcasting, that we use, but it's from December 2030 to December 2050 is when they will run. And I still have hope that if we could come up with a new type of a regenerative model and have a big enough critical mass and present that to the United Nations or raise awareness, that we could actually maybe even influence them to leapfrog. Right now, it doesn't look that way. I don't want to be a party pooper, but if you think about sustainability creates an infrastructure for us to springboard off into, I would hope, regeneration, but into resilience, because it doesn't matter how much sustainability you have. If climate change comes in and one day there's a hurricane, it can wipe out 100% of your sustainability, energy, food, and that doesn't get built back up right away. But if you have resilience in your infrastructures, in your systems, when the flood comes, when the drought comes, you have water reserves, you have other infrastructures in place that the very next hour you have energy, hopefully renewable, or you have water, you have sanitation, you have that infrastructure that's resilient for that forthcoming climate change that could happen, hurricanes, extreme weather events, things like that. And that's the direction they're going, which honestly falls into adaptation and mitigation, which I don't like. I really think that we should be proactive in more regenerative measures, but that's where we're at. So sorry to be a party pooper.
That's all right. We can have a cup of coffee. That's all right. We can have a little bit of sugar, then we'll be no. But at least there's a step. I mean, so we know that the resilient development goals will be on their way. And we're coming to the end of our time. I'd like to ask one final question for you, and this is, Pavlina, there's one project you're working on which really inspires you.
I mean, we speak a lot about Humanitas, and it is a very inspiring project, but maybe another one I really love. So we inspired from Classical, actually, Startup Incubators program. We created a program for small and medium enterprises in collaboration with the Cantonal Bank in Aargau. And we not only provide them with the knowledge and tools, as I mentioned, but we also create a community. So we incubate 10 companies per year, and those 10 companies per year also share challenges, but successes between each other, and then can not only cross-pollinate, but also work in the future together. It's very original, and it's kind of buzzing around sustainability. And of course, it actually goes way beyond sustainability. But as I said, they don't need too many frameworks. So we call it sustainability, but we teach them circular economy, regeneration, and everything.
That's really great. That's really cool. It's very, very local, very, very down to earth. One short inspirational project you're working right now.
Okay, the short's always hard. So I want to just throw out a question. How many of you here can name 4 ecological economic models? Bobby, do you have one?
Ecological economic models.
Because you raised donut economics. What's another one? She said circular economics, right? Post-growth, degrowth. So that's 4. So when I ask that question normally to people, even economists, they're like, They really struggle. Well, there's more than 32 ecological economic models to date. Donut economics, circular economy, well-being economy, shared economy, platform economy, steady state economics, regenerative economics. So tons of ecological economic ideas out there. 32 and probably more coming all the time. The latest one that's really hopeful is interesting. It's a combination of few. It's called Earth for All from the Club of Rome, and they've combined the World Model 3, which is from the original Limits to Growth, and got your granders to come in and do an updated version of the World Model 3 from MIT, and then they've gotten Kate Roworth for the donut economics, and then they've got Professor Dr. Johan Rockström for planetary boundaries, and they've combined those three into this very short book, Earth for All idea. Could this be a new model that we push forward to the world? So that's a great thing. And what I'm seeing all over the world, not only Beyond Growth, not only Change Now, we're seeing people saying, we're fed up with the economies that we currently have. What are the new ones? And they're coming out with ideas to replace it. So that's really what I'm working on.
Thank you. And that was almost short, but it was to the point. This is cool. I got it. All right. So thank you both truly for our high level, our in the earth, on the ground, and walking in between the two conversation. I really thank you for being here and for your work. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris and Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.